Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Cynthia Li, welcome back to the New School at Commonweal.
Thank you for having me.
Cynthia, this conversation falls in the broad scope of what we call spiritual biographies. But I realized that we could both quarrel with both the word spiritual and the word biography, because it's not only the story of your evolution from childhood to who you are today, but it's also the story of a friendship, and it's the story of a journey of over 25 years of knowing each other and over a dozen years of really walking together in a journey of exploration of what it means to be human. So in that spirit, let me just start by saying you are a physician trained in internal medicine. You have studied integrative medicine, functional medicine, intuitive medicine. You have deeply studied Qigong. You have reflected on how all these different pieces fit in your current understanding of healing, which is one of the subjects we will explore in depth. You are the author of a memoir, Brave New Medicine, which has received considerable critical acclaim. And you also have a new book out that you have edited of teachings of one of your Qigong teachers, and are, to my knowledge, reflecting on further writing. So what would you add?
That sounds wonderful. And I would just add, I feel like, just before this conversation started, we were talking about, this journey of being human. And so I'm feeling that very much today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're also married to an extraordinary man and friend of mine, David Hochschild. You have two wonderful daughters. You and David have both an extended family and a community of friends that staggers my imagination as an introvert. So anyway, that might do for a start. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's start with this question of what healing means to you. We've both worked in healing for a long time, but your understanding of healing has continued to evolve. How would you describe what you understand by healing today?
I mean, I think in some ways, it's a very simple question. And I don't mean simple as in easy, but simple as in essential and very fundamental. I'm at the place right now where healing and living are really one and the same. And how do we live in abundance is directly related to what is healing. And, I think a lot of people know, right, the root of the word to heal means to become whole. And I think for a long time, it was a conceptual idea of wholeness and emotional, psychological, and it was a framework. But I don't feel like I've fully lived into what wholeness is as a much more integrated human being until the last several years. And that's really what I've been exploring. And so if I had to distill it down, that there is this state, and there's a lot of different languages for it. So, there's frameworks in wisdom traditions. There's also science frameworks as well. And as you mentioned in the intro, Qigong So in embodied consciousness traditions, there's also a lot of experiences that have been described. But I'll just use the scientific one because it's one that resonates deeply for me and one that I use with my patients now, which is a state called physiological coherence. And it's different than straight up relaxation, So I would say the previous scientific and clinical model would be like you're either in fight or flight mode, stress mode, or you're in relaxation mode, parasympathetic, rest and digest, or rest and restore in that mode. And of course, there's always a little bit of a balance. But the more we can be relaxed, the more we can heal. Because if we're under stress, we're not able to heal or become whole, whatever that wholeness is. But in this state now that neuroscientists have really mapped out and also measured the effects of the brain waves, the heart waves, and the respiration waves. So the breath, which is correlated with the body, all become synchronized. And so, yes, the parasympathetic, the rest and digest mode of the nervous system is activated, but that alone is a low energy state. So healing can happen, but it's kind of slow. It's a little bit passive. In this coherent state, it's an activated energy state. And so healing can happen and often quite quickly. And as I kind of describe it, almost as an afterthought. So we're not even focused on healing as a goal. We're just focused on becoming in this coherent state within ourselves. And then healing happens. The other thing that happens is that we can also move about our days much more in flow, right? So in Qigong, which is based on the Taoist principle of, there's something called Wu Wei, which is a Mandarin term that means doing without doing or effortless action. So it's not about passivity or idleness. It's about, again, coming into this coherence, not just within ourselves, but actually attuning to the coherence around us. Nature is a really good example, right, of that coherent state. And then things happen. And in fact, things happen quite quickly. And so, I think we all have encountered people where it's like, God, that person just looks like they're dancing through life, or there's a flow to it. And so that's another way in which the healing can happen much more quickly. And again, it's because we're coming into this sense of wholeness, not of just integrated wholeness, mind, body, heart within ourselves, but we're connecting now to a bigger whole with which we're completely fluid. We're all breathing the same atmosphere. We're all, and now kind of my leading edge right now is in the quantum fields. So we actually know now that there are fields. There's a field between us. There's a field between us and the community that we're surrounded by. And there's a field in this space. And it's just filling everything. It's acting almost as if a third party. And so the more we become kind of attuned to that and we can come into flow, these kind of quantum leaps in healing happen. And again, it's really focused on that. The root of that word is coming into wholeness and just understanding a much fuller, not just understanding with the mind, but experiencing with the heart and the body of the much more expanded nature of who we are, rooted in the body. Mm. Yeah.
Thank you for that. In the Commonweal Cancer Help Program, which I've been doing for 37 years, and in my imperfect approach to what healing means, we have a little description of healing, which you've referenced in many ways, but I just want to lay it out as we begin to contextualize that with what I regard as the very advanced description of healing that you've just offered us. And we say that healing is different from curing, that a cure is something that takes away a disease and it doesn't come back, that healing is a movement toward wholeness, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, if you give meaning to the word spiritual, that it can happen both in moving toward greater physical health, but it can also take place in losing ground physically and even in the dying process. That there are certain general conditions of healing. We talk about 7 healing practices: eating well, moving more, reducing stress, finding love and support, creating sacred space, and finding meaning in life, among others. And that while those are what we call common pathways to healing, that very often the most important pathways to healing are what we call unique pathways to healing, that there is something in our lives that at this moment, maybe on an ongoing basis, but at least at this moment, is the crucial thing. The great mystic William Blake said, if you would help another person, you must do so in unique particulars. And so we often find in the Cancer Help Program that while we can talk about the 7 healing practices, that it's often those unique conditions which are the real trigger to opening to the most powerful healing.
Yes.
Now, I lay that out for 2 reasons. One is for you to comment on it, but secondly, because I find in our friendship, it makes me smile because we, this is a parenthesis, you and I were driving out to see our friend and colleague Rachel Naomi Remen a couple of weeks ago. And on the way back, we got into a conversation about how we both deflect comments that come to us that, somebody sees us as some wonderful thing and we say, oh, no, not really, or whatever. And you were saying to me, Michael, you need to stop deflecting, right? You need to allow the person to give you the gift of this perception of you.
Well, you need to receive it.
And I need to receive it. But this will be an interesting conversation for you because you will be receiving my projections and more than projections, my appreciations of you, my deep appreciations. So all of that little, and without deflection, by the way.
Yes.
And so all of that is a prelude to what I was about to say, which is that in our friendship over we've known each other for 25 years, but over the last 12 years, we really engaged in this deep journey together into what we sometimes call the key field or the key Christ field or whatever it was, just our separate but parallel, sometimes overlapping journeys into this field that you've actually just been talking about. And for me, you have almost always been ahead of me in that journey. And I don't mean that I haven't done some useful things in the world, but what I've done that's been useful in the world has tended to be on a fairly practical level, not exclusively. I do work in healing, as you know, but a lot of it has been about Commonweal and other very pragmatic things. And you've had this deep focus. The image I've had of you, as you know, is I see you in a kind of a field of blue ether. It's like a blue sky, but it has a liquid quality. And you are swimming upward toward the light. And you never stop this effort, this movement upward. So because you tend to move to the top of every field that you enter rather rapidly, I have watched you for 12 years move through integrative medicine, functional medicine, intuitive medicine, Qigong, and also through 2 very life-threatening illnesses and what you learned from those. So for me, I haven't been able to take all of that in experientially, but I have been able to follow it. I have been able to understand what you were describing to me. So that is the context in which I say this little encapsulated vision of healing, which I think is useful. There's nothing wrong with it. But what interests me is that you are really proposing that we move beyond it, and in a way that I find very persuasive. In your experiences with your 2 principal Qigong teachers, with the first one, you described going on retreats with him with several very ill patients. I think they had Parkinson's disease, right?
Yes.
And they came in wheelchairs, right?
Yeah, they were wheelchair bound for months.
Right.
Advanced, rapidly progressing Parkinson's. Right. And yeah, by the end of the week, walking.
Right. It sounds like one of those stories, right?
It sounds like
they threw away their crutches and walked, but they did.
But they did.
Yeah.
And, one of so first off, let me just go back to the beautiful framework you just laid out is, I would say first, yes, the healing path has to be unique, because in order for each of us to come into our wholeness, we have to release and transform whatever is limiting us. And that just differs. It's as different as our fingerprints, right? So it's going to be different. And then the other thing I wanted to say also was that, this image of me swimming upward toward the light, I would say initially I felt like I was swimming, but it wasn't necessary. It wasn't because I was ambitious. It was because I had pretty debilitating, complex health challenges that I felt, anyways, in my experience, I felt forced to do it. Like I have no alternative, and I don't like the way I feel. I want to reclaim my life. Therefore, I'm going to go, right? So there's this broader expansion of integrative medicine. All right, how do I change my lifestyle? Oh my God, let's go into functional medicine, looking at hidden root causes of these chronic inflammatory conditions. So looking at, hidden allergens like gluten and dairy, looking at hidden, stealth infections like, gut parasites or Epstein-Barr virus, Lyme disease. Long COVID is a really good example, right, of these stealth infections that kind of linger in terms of chronic inflammation. So and toxins, actually, which was a lot of overlap of how I got actually introduced to Commonweal, was the environmental health stuff. But I began as a doctor to think wait a minute, what can we do to help our bodies detoxify as we're living in this world, right? That is very complicated in terms of the factors we're exposed to. And then I suddenly found I went from very few options in conventional medicine to, and I should just state my conditions were autoimmune thyroiditis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and dysautonomia, which is an uncoordinated, unsynchronized autonomic nervous system. So that just, things like blood pressure, heart rate, digestion, breathing, all those things become very, a little bit chaotic. So it's a very difficult and debilitating condition that a lot of people live with, including we're seeing a lot of it in long COVID now. So that was, so then I went from very few options in conventional internal medicine to kind of infinite. And, you talk to one practitioner of integrative or functional medicine, you get one diet, and another one recommends another diet. It became actually very overwhelming, and the number of tests and diagnostics and still having grays was very overwhelming. And so then I, again, swimming up, in through this ether, I felt like, whoa, wait a minute. How do you choose? And then, life would present me with various teachers. And I learned, oh, you can use intuition. I can tune in. I can, instead of ruling things out, I can rule things in and be much more efficient. It was a very pragmatic way of approaching health, right? So I wasn't trying to be an expert in everything. I was just trying to feel better. And a lot of that is the stuff that we do, right? And you beautifully named it out, listed those 7 or 8 parameters. And what I'm learning right now, well, so then I'll kind of just give the brief overview, was in 2017, I had a second health crisis. So I was, kind of on this very steady swimming upward path. And then I had a second health crisis where I was teetering on a pretty precarious edge for a few months. And that's when I really began. I had already been practicing Qigong, which is an embodied consciousness practice working with subtle energies, for about 4 years at that point, and began very pragmatically. It was like a rehabilitation exercise, and it was helping a lot with my equilibrium and with my energy levels. But when I came to that second crisis, I felt the smallness of what I knew cumulatively, kind of relative to this great mystery that is the universe, and what is life and death. And so I actually ended up surrendering as I was practicing Qigong from my bed, and surrendered again, not to give up, but to surrender actually into this field, which I didn't actually know I was doing. I was just practicing coherence. So I surrendered, and then, I was still, though, doing integrative and functional medicine, right? Like I was going to the doctor. I was receiving acupuncture treatments. I was getting IV infusions, antibiotics. I was taking supplements and meds. And so, and I was, when I was able to, I was doing movement and exercise as I was able to. So it's not an either or thing, because initially I kind of swung again, like, oh, it's none of those things. It's this thing. It's the energy, and you work with the energy. And, going back to that point about the Wu Wei, the art of effortless action is the art of effortless healing, was that I began to realize, like, oh, I'm doing all these things, but I'm doing it in this state of flow. So I'm not even thinking about my health goal. I'm just being in the present moment. And then what is the response at the present moment? And, oh, thank God I have all these other tools, and I have these resources, the community around us. And then I know, I have an acupuncturist that I've been seeing. So it was that I let go of this limit. What was limiting me was this strong attachment to healing and what that looked like and what that path looked like. But I wouldn't have gotten there had I not had this, this second occurrence. And so it's really changed how I not just approach my life, how I approach parenting, how I approach my patients. But I've found that the healing kind of happens because I'm not really thinking about it.
When, as I said, we've known each other for about 25 years, and as you mentioned, we came together in early meetings of the Collaborative on Health and the Environment, which is part of Commonweal's work. And you were part of a small group, I think, called Moms Against Pops, wasn't it the name of your group?
It was called Moms. This is a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was when my older daughter, who's now 18, was just born. So Moms. I can't even remember what it stands for now.
But the point was that
they
you
would
were
organize. Yeah, we were an activist group.
You were an activist group, and you were very well aware that since human beings are at the top of the food chain, that breast milk contains more toxics than almost any other food, and that's what we feed babies. And mothers download a good deal of their body burden to their babies. And so for any sentient mother, that's a concern. That's actually one of the principal reasons that we got so deeply involved in the chemical issues. So anyway, that was 25 years ago. Then when we really reconnected about our interest in healing, you were coming off, what was it, close to 8 or 10 years of being largely bedridden.
Yeah, largely housebound.
Largely
Yeah.
housebound. And so you were really working to, with, as we said, integrative and functional medicine. And then the second health crisis, where we really worried that we were going to lose you, and it was at that point, I remember coming over to your house at your husband David's request to visit you, and you were sitting in a window seat with a child's coloring book, a Christian child's coloring book, and just working with that book. And you had been brought up even in a very evangelical household. Your parents had founded an evangelical church, but you were in the process of rediscovering a completely different understanding of what Christ energy is and how it relates to your sense of the key field.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which actually is another dimension, I would say, of healing and defining healing as an experience of this wholeness is returning. There's a returning home, kind of whatever that means, And again, it's going to be different for everyone because we all have different understandings, different histories, different contexts for what home is. But it's reclaiming parts of ourselves that, it's not a linear thing, right? Healing is much more spiral. So it's a returning and integrating these parts that we actually think are not relevant anymore, but coming back to them in a different way. And so for me, as you said, was so the one dimension I could say, oh, okay, I surrendered into this this coherent field, right? And I became much more coherent. I could organize my inner energy states, and I could organize the field kind of around me. And so I was kind of moving through, even at a very brittle point in time. But the other piece that was really surprising about this whole experience was that, on that edge, I wanted my childhood Bible. And I hadn't touched it in, 30 years. So I was raised evangelical in the heartland of Texas, and our church, which my parents co-founded, was really our second home. And but as a teenager, I really struggled with the duality of heaven and hell. And as I was taught, most of the people around me that I was looking at were going to suffer like eternally. And so it was very disturbing for me. I, went to college, went to medical school, really with a kind of a drive to reduce suffering that was happening here on Earth. And, and curious, of course, about how that intersected with, if anything, if consciousness or souls or spirit, whatever you want to call it, continued afterwards, like, could we actually reduce, the suffering there as well? So I would say that was a conscious and a very subconscious driver for me in going into medicine. And but when I kind of left for medical school, that was kind of my new religion, and I really left the church and its teachings behind. And so 2017, the second health crisis, it was really surprising. I remember how surprised my husband was. My parents were really surprised, but they had kept my childhood Bible this whole time. Even having moved, to China for 20 years and come back, they still had that. But it really surprised me as well. So when I began to read about Jesus, you know, I mean, I'm looking through this Bible and I'm looking at my childhood handwriting and beginning to integrate these threads as I was reading about Jesus. You know, there's a story where he cures a leper, right? Kind of, you know, and I had seen these things in the Qigong retreats, and I knew these stories, right, by heart, but they had become rote, and they were so distanced and removed from like kind of pertinent present day life. It was like, oh yeah, this guy 2,000 years ago, you know, kind of did that. That it's very easy to embrace in the past, but to embrace something like that in the present reality was something quite different. And there were other stories that I had kind of even skimmed by, where Jesus is walking through a crowd and he knows that somebody touches him because he feels energy actually drain from him. And I was like, wait a minute, that's energy, you know, that's chi. And and then also reading about all the rituals that he taught his disciples. You know, when he was going to be crucified, right? He broke bread and drank wine. And it was really about not thinking about him or analyzing him, but ingesting his essence, which is a total mind, body, heart coherence act. And so I just the Bible read like a totally different text. And then there were these parables, right? Which are these, I would read them as tales of kind of morality. They had a lesson to them. But again, reading them in the context of my own life, like there's one about the parable of the prodigal son, right? The son who leaves his house, his father's house, goes out in the world, experiences things, kind of squanders some of the gifts that he's been given, comes back and is received and just totally welcomed. And I saw myself in that story, and it was like a living story, not just a moral story from 2,000 years ago. So all of these things began to really awaken in me a wholeness, an integration. And then this Qigong practice, which I had had for 4 years, even though it was very, very healing, the energy field felt very impersonal. And suddenly I realized, like, oh, and actually you were a key part of this understanding in teaching me about the difference between Jesus and the Christ, right? So usually when I was growing up, it was always Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. And I never even knew what Christ was. And so, and there was one talk that I went to where you were giving at the Integral Yoga Institute, where I heard it actually for the first time about the Christ being consciousness. And so when I was at the Edge, 2017, and I was reading through the Bible, I began to understand that Jesus may have been crucified and resurrected, but that the Christ was the living part, right? The Christ was living energy, was this field, was this consciousness. And so I began to experience this invisible field as a very intimate relationship, as opposed to something that was a little bit abstract. So that actually catapulted my Qigong practice. And it was a really big factor in this very radical healing that I experienced. And so what happened was, right, I was so in the present moment, you know, doing things, taking care of myself, but in this flow state and in such a present, coherent state that my healing happened very quickly. And before I knew it, kind of in hindsight, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like that actually normally would have taken probably years. And it happened in a matter of months. So this experience of a radical healing and trying to understand it from the inside out has kind of been what has been, you know, kind of my leading edge for the last few years in how do I work with patients and how do I work with larger groups where there's a field amongst the group that they can really harness to potentiate each other's healing.
There's so many directions we could take this at each point, but I want to take a few moments now, first of all, just to mention that our mutual friend Kelly Turner chose you as one of her radical remission stories, and she interviewed you, and there's a wonderful tape of your experience. In other words, Kelly, who's done some of the best work on radical remissions, very sound work, and has very carefully selected the people that she regarded as having recovered from extreme illness situations, and she chose you as one of those. So that speaks to what you're describing here. Sometimes in describing myself, I've used the word that I'm something of a mystic. And in our dialogues, you said, "Oh no, I don't like that language so much. I'd rather speak of invisible forces," I think is your word. Is that right? Invisible.
Yeah. Or are you talking about mystery versus
mystery.
like the great mystery versus invisible forces?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like it because I don't know. There's something more playful to it.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of like Star Wars or you know.
But it's also more concrete in a
It's
certain
more
sense.
concrete because of the quantum science, for me anyways. The quantum science now that's available, like there's quantum science in terms of like, okay, there's dark matter and dark energy, and it makes up probably an estimated 96% of the universe. Like we don't know, we can't measure, we have no idea. We can only, I don't even know how they do it actually, but mathematicians and physicists, either they calculate it indirectly or they infer it. I don't know what they're doing, but that's the figure that they've come up with. And that's kind of fun, but it's kind of like, well, what do you do with it? You know? So I'm just, again, I feel like I come from a very pragmatic, organic, human, like, hey, I just want to actually understand if it has any relevance to daily life and to healing. And if so, how do we apply it? So when I use the term invisible forces, for me, I can grasp it a little bit more. So just, I mean, we don't even have to go into it. And I'm certainly not a physics expert. So, but what I know or what I've learned is that there are three general categories, you know, electromagnetic and gravitational. And then some would say maybe subtler energy fields. But that they, like I mentioned earlier, they're actually all around us. And now the prevailing theory is that all of matter actually emerges from these fields. If we didn't have the fields, we actually wouldn't even have matter. And what's interesting to me as a Qigong practitioner is there's a whole theory of Qigong, right? And we call it Qigong science. And the Qigong science is based on millennia of people practicing and passing on this wisdom. And where does that wisdom come from? I mean, we don't know, but they've been teaching basically this, that everything is qi, everything is subtle energy, and that matter emerges from the qi field. And so the more I learn about these things, but it's more that I directly practice it through these embodied consciousness practices, right? Every day, that it's just like, oh, this is really ordinary. This is very ordinary. And so the way to use it, for example, is actually, I'll give an example that is very fresh in my mind, but this happened 18 years ago when I was a new mom. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but now I know it's the field. I was taking my infant to a mother and baby yoga class. And, you know, it's not this standard yoga class where it's really peaceful and restful and all that. It's because you have all these infants, right? And at any given time, 2 or 3 moms are jiggling or burping or nursing or changing the diaper, right? It's like, and there's always ambient sounds in the background. There was one day I went and it was packed, the studio. And so wall to wall, there were probably 30 moms and infants. And at one point, 10 minutes in, is like every single baby was crying. Nobody was practicing yoga. You know, everyone is in an effort, not just for their baby, but for the room. Like, hey, you know, we got to tend to our babies. So that's the doing part, right? Wasn't working. And then the yoga teacher just yells across the room and just says, every mama, put your baby down. And so we were like, wait, what? And she said, put your babies down and get into tree pose. So tree pose, you're standing on one leg, the other leg is, on the inner thigh, and then you're going like this. So basically, all of your attention is inward. You have to focus. So we all did that, and I kid you not, it was like one of those miracles that I saw at the Qigong retreat. The whole room quieted down. And I'm looking at my baby, I'm like, wait, what? And she's like gurgling, happy, whatever. But that was the field. So what happened was we each got our own inner fields aligned, right? In that simple embodiment practice. Mind is inside the body and the heart is open. Then, right, with this pose, the heart is open. And then we're changing these invisible forces around us, right? So it's like a third party, right? We're changing the water, the ether, if you want, that we're swimming in. And then that energy is what harmonizes the babies and allows the babies actually to come into that themselves. And so I see this time and time again with Qigong and with energy healing even. A lot of the more traditional energy healing is my energy I use to heal you. So after we do the healing, I'm going to need a little bit of restoration, right? I need to recharge, whatever. But now so much of the energy healing is about changing the field. And then the field is what then heals the other person. And there's there's minimal diminishment of either person's energy because it's this massive field that is doing something, that is changing. So I can't, again, my thinking mind is limited in really being able to grasp it. But I see the effects over and over and over again. And mostly I feel it also within myself of the changes. And so that's just kind of where we are. So again, in the spiral, a lot of people talk about, we're at this place where we're going back to indigenous wisdom and we're reclaiming that. And yes, but because we're in this spiral, we're reclaiming that, but we're reclaiming it with our modern, right, kind of ideas and information and technologies. It's a constant evolution. It's not going back to what it was. Just like when I went back to my evangelical teachings, I wasn't going back to that. I was going back, but with who I was right now as a changed person. So as a species and as a planet, we are returning, as I understand it anyways, but from where we are now, so that the more we can integrate it, it's not an either or. It's not like we go back to that and then forget this. It's really about this integration. So that's really the heart of healing.
Speaking of this quantum field, we often share dreams and experiences. And both of us have shared very powerful dreams with each other. And we both track our dreams as part of our lives. We also have the experience, each of us, of our dead speaking to us in ways that feel persuasive. We also sometimes have the experience of teachers who are no longer in the body coming to us in ways that are very strong. You mentioned beginning to use intuition, but beyond that, you have worked extensively, and I have worked a little bit with medical intuitives who have extraordinary abilities. You yourself have developed medical intuition at a level with your patients and your beloveds that you can often spot something that wouldn't have come directly to mind to a clinician about something. we both have intuitions of past lives. How do you hold these phenomena of past lives, of the power of intuition to guide not only medical decisions, but life decisions? Teachers appearing to us, our dead speaking to us. There's a level at which, up until this point, you've been saying, I'm just a pragmatist. I needed to develop this in order to feel better. I've come to understand the science. Here's some little examples of coherence, all that. But these intuitions, or we don't have proof of most of them, but experientially, they're extraordinarily real. And the intuitive medical or other intuitive things, we do have evidence that they actually change medical decisions or intuitions about life that turn out to be deeply true. And we both know, and you've worked extensively with a medical intuitive who is able to do this a good deal of the time. So how do you hold that whole field of phenomena in terms of the quantum energy field that you've just been describing?
Well, I guess I could lump it with the invisible forces, which I don't purport to really understand. I don't feel like I hold them. I observe them when they happen. And I will say, I don't know is a phrase that comes to mind just when I was listening to you, because most of the time I don't even, if I get messages or I get, like my dreams, for example, which have been very powerful, very expansive, sometimes mind-blowing to where I need to actually ground, right? In the beginning, I would say when I was starting to have them and when I was pre-2017, when I was more sort of goal-oriented towards like health or as some kind of like end goal, which I would also say about healing is that because it's so closely entwined with living, it's not, there's no end point, right? Like it's just about being alive and living abundantly. And what does that mean? So pre-2017, I was very much more goal-oriented and like, okay, I want to get to this point of functionality. And then I will, I'll accept that and then I'll live my life and then kind of take it slowly from there. So with intuition, which I developed, as I mentioned earlier, as a tool to try to narrow down what are the better therapies, what are the better tests, it was useful. But since then, going back to your analogy about the swimming in the ether, and you know this too, because I've said it many times, I don't actually want to swim. And in fact, I don't feel like I'm swimming. I feel like I'm being propelled. And sometimes I feel like I'm kind of just bracing, like, how do I slow this down, right? Like these experiences you're talking about, that our awareness, because we're attuned more to wholeness, whatever that is, and these invisible fields, the experience of reality, of ordinary reality, is much bigger than it used to be. And so how do I navigate that? And how do I continue to stay embodied? And what do I do with that information? Is kind of how I would rephrase that question. And so since the second health crisis, I've been much less attached to what does that mean? And in fact, I use it less now as an overt tool, even in my medical consultations. because I can see my own attachments, and that's where I become limited, right? So if I can use it in a really free state and not kind of be attached to the outcome, then, you know what, I'll happily use it. So what I always start with, like, for example, like, let's say I had a dream where somebody, somebody who had died appeared and had a message for me. In the past, I would kind of be like, oh, what does that mean? And and I would kind of follow up and like, oh, maybe talk to another person who knew that person and just kind of, is that a sign? I kind of wanted to know. And where I am right now is I really observe it more. And oftentimes, if I can correlate it with something, I'll be like, oh, okay, you know what? Actually, that was kind of interesting. There was a correlation. And then if there's not a correlation, I'm like, oh, okay, there's no correlation that I can, or any significance or application that I can, necessarily see right now. Sometimes it comes like, 3 months later, maybe it's 2 years later. I don't know. And I'll be like, oh my God, I had that dream. And so what I really take all of these experiences and phenomenon to reflect to me is simply, is my consciousness showing me something about my consciousness. And that's kind of just at the fundamental level. So oftentimes it's, oh, you know what? My consciousness was showing me something, and that's an attachment that I have because I can feel it in my body. So my task is to actually let that go. Or, oh, you know what? Okay, like, let's say a teacher appeared. What does that mean? And was that teacher really communicating something to me? And on one level, it really doesn't matter. It just matters that, oh, my consciousness is showing me a message that perhaps I need to pay attention to. So I will say also, just because it seems so fluid right now and so comfortable, that this was something, as you know, I had a lot of resistance to in the beginning, and I had a lot of fear, but I also had a lot of skepticism. So as I see it now, is working through those resistances was part of going beyond what limited me, right? And so now I can talk about it in a kind of matter-of-fact way, but it's because I've worked through a lot of that I have a lot less fear. But and then when I'm not attached to what it means, it makes it more playful, right? Because if something shows up, and then I'll be like, oh my God, that's really funny. Consciousness or the universe, whatever you want to call it, these invisible forces, it's really funny, because it kind of, that was the message and that was the image. And then this was actually what I took from it. And they get kind of paired together. So yeah, I just feel like, what, that's all life is. That's all healing is a learning journey. And can we be aware to what is being shown to us? And it's largely being shown to us through our own consciousness.
Let me take that question of whether you lump these phenomena in with invisible forces or not. And as I understood your response, it was, this is just consciousness at play, and if I don't get attached to things, I can just be interested and curious as to how these things manifest. Did I hear you right?
Yeah, but okay, let me give you like a more tangible example, concrete example, using coherence, okay? Mm-hmm. Because it's not sort of the big invisible forces. I mean, we can talk about like the force field, if you want, between us, right? Neuroscientists have measured, right, that like each of us as human beings, as individuals, we have an electromagnetic field, and it goes in and it goes out, right? So it's in a torus shape, and that the heart is the center, because what we can measure out, the electromagnetic field of the heart is much stronger than that of the brain. And so they've measured it out several feet, and it's very similar, right? And people, they don't have to be like mystics or intuitives to be able to have had the experience of like going into a room or meeting someone and just feeling like either, oh my God, like light. I don't know. It feels light filled, or the opposite. Whoa, there's something kind of heavy here going on, and that's the electromagnetic field. And so when we're in proximity to each other, we're very sensitized, or we're in each other's fields. And so if I am in a very, very coherent state where all my, my brain waves, my heart waves, my breath waves are very smooth and sign-like, then I can help bring you into that, even if you're in an agitated state. So that's one example of how I use it with my patients. Like sometimes I begin a patient consult and they're completely in tears, they're agitated, they're scared, whatever it is. And if that's the case, I say, you know what, can we just start with a centering practice? And I just guide them. It takes about 5 minutes. And then we do the visit in that coherent state and things just flow, right? So that's an example. And so I feel like it's not even like, I'm not healing you. We're creating this field together, and I'm guiding you in this coherence practice. So we're doing it together, and then we amplify the coherence that's in this field, and then things happen in flow. And we can think more clearly, we can feel more gratitude. The body actually heals as well, right? So that's kind of a concrete example. And so if we're talking about that as an invisible force, if you will, or even a phenomena that might be considered more energetic or more psychic, whatever word you want to use, is that, the more we cultivate that, the more we become sensitized, so that, oh, you know what? I might be able to sense in you where it is actually that you're feeling not coherent, And so it is anyways, to me, it feels very ordinary now, because it's a part of our physical bioelectric makeup of who we are.
But what I still don't understand, actually, let me do this backward. I'm going to offer you my interpretation of this. As you know, I have become more and more interested in what I am calling speculative cosmology, or cosmological hypotheses. All right? And I start from this place. I start from the universal and the very concrete. The universal is, there was a piece in the New York Times. This is, late September 2023. There was a piece in the New York Times by two physicists who were saying, along the lines of your point about how 96% of the universe is either dark energy or dark matter. They were saying, guess what? The standard model of physics and cosmology is breaking down. Our working hypothesis about how this works is all. And one example they gave was that they have discovered galaxies that existed before the Big Bang, all right? That existed before the Big Bang. And then they gave 3 or 4 other examples of concrete physics examples of why the standard model was breaking down. And they said, we seem to be right at the edge of what Thomas Kuhn calls the scientific revolution. And we can keep trying to patch this, which we've been trying to do for some time, but it isn't working, all right? And so they linked the problem of galaxies that are older than the Big Bang to a famous physics experiment in which light enters a little box and it decides whether it's going to manifest as a wave or a particle. And if the physicist is looking for a wave, it manifests as a wave. If he's looking for a particle, it manifests as a particle. Mm-hmm. But this great physicist developed what was called a delayed something rather experiment, in which the light had decided whether it was going to manifest as a wave or a particle. And then they looked for the other one, and it turned out to be the other one. So that the hypothesis became, I'm not doing a very good job on the experiment, that our thought, the thought of the experimenter, plays a fundamental role in the material, in the energetic form, light or particle, which shows up. And there were two articles, I may be confounding them, but one of them was a great physicist saying the more we look at the cosmos, the more it looks like a giant thought. Yes. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, I hold the cosmic speculation that a whole set of phenomena that we don't understand now, including psi phenomena like telepathy and psychokinesis and other things, as well as past life experiences, the dead coming to us in present time, healing energies like Qi that we can't measure at this point, subtle energies. I hold the view that it is the hope, the prayer, the view, that in the new cosmology that is emerging in this moment of planetary crisis, it will encompass explanations or understandings, better than explanations, of a whole set of these phenomena that are very real experientially, but outside the realm of what we can measure. So I'll take it one step forward beyond that, which is when physicists look at the cosmos right now, they are astonished that it seems designed specifically to support life. And in order, because that drives people like Stephen Hawking's crazy, they developed the theory of the multiverse in order to account for that. That enabled them to say, hey, the universe isn't designed to support life. There's zillions of universes. We just happen to live in one of the zillions that looked designed to support life. It's pure random accident, right? But we have no evidence for the multiverse. And the only universe we can observe seems specifically designed to support life, all right? So that's called the anthropic principle. And the anthropic principle appears in weak and strong variants, and the weak variant says, yeah, it seems designed that way, kind of, so what? And the strong one says, yeah, it's designed that way. And if the universe is designed to support life, what does that tell us about the cosmos? And then moving to, another source, a more mystical source, it's suggestive that the laws of the universe must in some sense be based in love, because the universe creates organic life and nothing is created by mistake. And since the universe seems designed to support life, it is at least suggestive that the universe is based on some cosmic principles of love. And we know in experiential reality that love is the greatest healer, or it's certainly among the greatest healers. So what I'm laying out here, I could do it in much greater detail, is a view that when I asked you how you held these phenomena in relationship to the invisible forces, I am laying out a speculative cosmology or a cosmological hypothesis that, in fact, these phenomena will turn out to be related to what you call the Qi field or we call the Qi Christ field, because it will be evidence of the fact that that coherence heals.
Beautiful.
Well, what do you think?
Well, I would say, I mean, there's a lot I don't know.
Sure,
And
I
I
don't
mean,
know
obviously,
either.
we don't know as a collective, right? A species, we don't know. And I would just say that, I'm humbled, right, by collectively how much we know, actually, but also how little we know. And I would say, living in a universe or multiverse that's that big, trying to understand it from our vantage point, which is very small, is pretty ambitious. And this is part of the wisdom teachings, but it's also something that I've encountered a lot in healing circles and healing frameworks. Is actually understanding the universe is actually understanding ourselves, right? So, like that stuff, it can be really, really big and overwhelming and confusing for me. I won't say it's that much easier going within myself to the inner universe, but it feels more doable. It's like, oh, if I can really understand my nature, and because I'm part of whatever is bigger, I can understand much more the nature of the universe or the multiverse if I can understand myself. So that's always where I start, is myself. And I would also say, add to that, though, that, again, any of these frameworks, if they're mental, for me, where I go is I start connecting in a very human way. Like love. Oh, love is the greatest healing force, which is true. Like, I understand. I've had these incredible experiences of human relational love that has been this catalyst for healing. But when we go into from my experience, when we go into the energetic and the consciousness places of wholeness, of healing, love is not an emotion.
No, it's a way of seeing, as Rachel Remen puts it.
I would say, from what I experienced in the embodied consciousness, it's a way of seeing. So that's first the consciousness part, but it's also it's a state of being. It's a state of oneness. And so when we are practicing and connecting to our bodies as the 99.99% empty space that we are, which is largely subtle energies, right? If we go into the atoms that we're made out of, the atoms are 99.99% emptiness. And that's what I mean about like going into the inner universes and the true nature of who I am. We're largely 99.99% energy field. So energy field out there, energy field in here. So, but when I can experience myself as that, which there are all these different traditions that teach this now, right? Including scientific ones and clinical ones now. But there's a fluidity. You're just one with everything, It's a bioelectric experience of it. It's not a conceptual one. And so there's an experience. So in 2017, when I surrendered into that field, it was that experience was everything is one. And I'm just consciousness observing me as one. So that experience of love is an unconditional kind of love, right? Whereas even the greatest loves, human to human, I would say, are, there's probably a little bit of condition attached to it, unless someone is so present and aware. So I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of I don't know. And at the same time, the experience is that we're largely subtle energy. Everything is. And that we come from subtle energy. And then what is the framework and what are the calculations and what really, if we're giving names and concepts to these things in the larger reality of the cosmos, I do not know. But I also, because of this playfulness we were talking about, is when I see the scientists coming up with these things that are matching with, Qigong science or other traditions, it feels very playful to me. I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, these people, they might not have known it conceptually. They knew it by direct experience for a very long time. And so, but going back to your thing about consciousness and thought and the slit lamp example that you were talking about, is that thought, that information is the subtlest form of qi or energy. So it's part of this information field. So like if I come into coherence, what's also being exchanged is the information of the heart and the body and the mind, right? That's actually what's changing the energy, or it's informing the energy, and then the energy that changes is then kind of affecting everything. So it's really one continuum, one field.
What I love about this exchange, I'll bring in another aspect of you that we haven't talked about. And you went through a period of time, certainly after you got to California, maybe before, where you were very interested in philosophy. Mm-hmm. And so you studied what? I think Kierkegaard was one of the people you went to.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite ones.
What?
He was one of my favorites.
One of your favorites. But what I want to do is interpret what the exchange we just had in terms of a philosophical move. That's what, Because here I put out, in other words, you would describe the invisible field, the invisible forces, the field, the coherence and all that. And I said, well, what about all these phenomena that we experience? And you said, well, I could lump them with the field, but, I'm playful with them. So then I put out this crazy cosmological speculation, and your philosophical move, which fascinated me, first of all, was elegant, secondly, it was kind, and third, it was playful. And your philosophical move was to say, beautiful, and then you said, the theory that with our tiny intelligences can understand the cosmos is very uncertain, to be kind. And but if you center yourself in your own being and your own experience, then you have a ground from which to reflect, and allowing that ground to be spacious, you can simply hold these things. I'm not doing it justice. But so the philosophical move was to say it was a beautiful speculation, and then you also said we can hold that in a very mental way. I know you well enough to know that, quote, mental holding of things is not at the top of your hierarchy. So you hold it in this.
Well, I have limited capacity.
All right.
Others are much more capable of that.
Nothing limited about your capacity.
No,
so
it is.
Anyway, you go into this. The philosophical move is to go into the experiential field, and then just to hold it spaciously. And I loved it, but it's a good example in living time of the kinds of conversations we have. So,
but I do want to comment, actually, on, because you were talking about, so I mean, the short answer to your reflection on that was just, I don't know. It's above my pay grade, Can I comment on that? I can, but am I just pulling stuff out of my, my rear? Because I'm kind of quoting people who know more than I do. But the other thing, that I think has been really interesting for me, based in terms of a cosmological framework, is even this question about, the universe or the multiverse, whatever, you want to call it, sustaining life. Because just like, this is what I've been learning recently, is just as love, right, from a consciousness, a unitive consciousness experience and framework, but also from an energetic experience of that, is not an emotion, right? And so the definition of life, what we're calling life, is actually biological life. And life, as energy simply moving and transforming, and different energies merging and transforming, and Like that's a different level, but that's a definition of life. And so when I think about like a cosmological framework about life, it's a much bigger definition and experience of life than what I think as a human being as biological life.
In other
So
words, life is a larger frame.
yeah, so in terms of the universe or something beyond, designed for life, I would say, yeah, absolutely, because it's an energetic kind of life, right? Movement as opposed to something that's just flatline. And so again, that's what we can learn from the body, right? Something that's dead has a flat line. And so what's living are these waves. And so is the universe, does it appear to be wave-like? Yeah, it does. And does consciousness appear to affect those waves versus particles? Yes, it does. And so, but how do we know that? Because of these smaller experiments that we can do, that we can reduce it down to something we can see. And so it's in the same way of understanding our bodies, not as a deflection of any means, but truly, if I can understand my body and observe it and experience it, I can much more readily observe and experience what the cosmos probably is. So I just wanted to clarify that.
That's good. That's a nice way to close that parenthesis of cosmological speculation. Tell us about your present Qigong teacher, and tell us about the book that you edited and helped bring into being. What's the title? What's his name? Where can people find it? And who is he? And why does he draw you so deeply?
So first I just want to say that my entry to Qigong was a teacher named Ming Tong Gu, and I still practice with a lot of his recordings as well. And we still have a friendship and also a teacher-student relationship. And I studied really intensely with him for, I don't know, maybe 7 years or so. And it was this lineage called Zinen Qigong, which means wisdom ability Qigong. And then speaking of, dreams and kind of information, I had a dream 3 years ago that the Grandmaster, the founder of this lineage, who's still alive, who I've never met, I've only seen a few recordings of him, but Dr. Pong was his name, is his name, and he was Western and Eastern trained in terms of medicine, studied a lot of different, under a lot of different Grandmasters, and he synthesized, actually brought in a lot of modern science into Qigong and distilled it down actually kind of into the essential components, the essence, because Qigong has many different lineages and many, many different forms. And he was like, okay, how do we kind of unify things into a simpler way that is much more easily disseminated in today's modern and more technological age? So that was resonant for me. But 3 years ago, Dr. Pong, the founder, appeared to me in a dream. And we were in the top floor, we were in the ICU of actually the CCU, it was the cardiac care unit, so I had to do with the heart. Top floor of a hospital, and the whole thing was empty though. I was standing in front of one of those big windows, in the ICU, CCU kinds of rooms, but everything was empty and it was just him standing there, and he didn't say anything. We didn't exchange anything, and that was it. It was more like a vision. And I remember thinking, again, like, what does that mean? And, I had some, analyses of it, but I kind of just tucked it away. And then over time, it kind of emerged for me. Like I just kind of kept getting different messages and experiences in my life where I was like, actually, I need to empty. Like it's about emptiness. I need to forget actually everything that I've learned and also empty my heart. I'm in this CCU, cardiac care unit. And so that was what I kind of came to take from it, not so much from an analytical, but just kind of an experiential message. And I was looking at some of Dr. Pong's videos on YouTube, which there aren't that many. And then Teacher Wei Qifeng, who's this current teacher, had a couple of videos that came up. And so I played a couple of the meditations, didn't resonate at all for me. I was like, whoa, what is this? And same lineage, same grandmaster, really different. And speaking of vibrations and just waveforms of people, and the way I would characterize like Master Ming Tong, the first teacher, was very colors of the rainbow, right? He's like orange, red, and yellow. And then Teacher Wei felt very blue, purple, like just really different manifestations of the same teaching, of the same lineage. And the purple blue did not resonate with me. But somehow over the next few months, I don't even actually remember how, but I ended up just doing a trial month, just one module, and he's based in China, so it was remote. And I just realized, like, whoa, it was all about emptying and about letting go of attachments, and also practicing in a community and how to cultivate this collective field, and the field as a conscious field as opposed to a energy field. And I was like, well, I have something to learn. So I started with him, and then I kind of have continued and still involved in, am a teacher and an organizer and a healer in his community. And I'm now actually coaching the teachers and the healers who are in the community. So it's been a real growth opportunity for me. And the book, which we just launched in July, this past summer, July 2023, is called Mingjue Awakening, Mingjue Awakening. And Mingjue means pure consciousness. So it's about, just kind of this continual process of us awakening to our wholeness. And it's about healing. It's about managing our energy, but supported by this collective field. And then so that when we're practicing Qigong from this Mingjue, this pure consciousness awareness and observation, it's like we're practicing for this field and the field practicing through us. That's kind of the simplest way I can explain it. But a lot of the teachings are about Wu Wei, are about this effortless action, effortless doing, effortless healing, which is what I'm currently really writing about as well. It feels very counterproductive and almost irrational, like in terms of healing. For example, one of the first things I learned about pure consciousness, collective field, Qigong healing is that you need to let go of your attachments to three things when you're healing either yourself or another person. You let go of the person, even if it's yourself. You let go of the attachment to the condition, the health challenge. You let go of your attachment to the outcome.
Say again the three.
You let go of the person needs the healing.
Right.
You let go of the health condition.
Yeah.
You let go of your attachment to the outcome. And I remember I was like, on some weird level, deep level, I knew it was the truth. But then, my thinking mind was like, what else is there? That's why we heal, that's what we do for other people. That's why we heal ourselves. What else is there? And it's really about having that intention, that thought that you were talking about that actually transforms, but planting it there almost like a seed and then just allowing it to do what it needs to do. Because when we are very fixated on the goal or the person or the condition, we can actually become our own obstruction to the healing that we want to happen, right? So it's about, so when we're attached, when we're fixated on any of those things, even if it's well-meaning, the teaching is that we come out of coherence, right? So we actually constrict that energy. Instead of the smooth sine waves, we become a little bit more, right? We become, because the attachments are actually associated with fear and resistance and frustration, not love. So if we can practice coherence, but then we're supported by the coherence of this collective field that is all practicing coherence, we can stay coherent much more readily. And then whoever needs healing, including ourselves, we're just in this coherent field. So then the healing happens much more as a side effect, but also potentially much more rapidly. And I've witnessed that also firsthand, you know, in myself, but also in other participants as well.
You've mentioned that you have an acupuncturist. I know he's been important to you. We haven't talked about that facet of your healing work. Could you say something about him and why he is important to you?
Yeah, so his name is Bob Levine, Robert Levine. And he was, when I was at my real low, the first time around, when I was housebound, he was the first alternative practitioner, alternative meaning just outside of conventional Western medicine, that I had sought out, really out of desperation. And he was the mentor to, he's been mentored many, many very gifted acupuncturists and healers. But at the time, he was a mentor to one of my very closest friends. And this friend was the one who connected me with Bob. And so I had seen Bob every week or every other week for, you know, the first year, and then kind of spaced it out. But I was seeing him regularly for a few years. And he got me to the place where I was no longer housebound, which was when I began to slowly travel. You know, I was working at a medical clinic just like 2 half-days a week. So I wasn't fully housebound, I was largely housebound, right? But very limited. And I worked in a clinic 2 half-days a week near my house. So I was maintaining my Western medicine, but then I was learning from him about holistic frameworks of understanding health. And it dovetailed really beautifully with the ecological paradigm of health as well, right, in terms of environmental health. But again, our bodies as a microcosm of this bigger cosm of the planet, and then a bigger cosm, right, a macrocosm of the universe. And so Bob was that mentor for me. And I learned a tremendous amount, you know, and he was actually the primary healer in my memoir, Brave New Medicine. But he was also the one who introduced me, of course, because of traditional Chinese medicine, to Qi and to Qigong. And he had actually encouraged me many times to consider Qigong as a bridge between the sessions. But, you know, as I alluded to earlier, I was very skeptical. I had a lot of fear. I didn't know anything about Qigong. And in fact, my evangelical upbringing had kind of talked about all the potential dangers of working with energy and, like, you know, the cultishness of things. And so I had a lot of hesitation. I didn't pursue it then. And then it was later on another mentor, when I was ready, had mentioned, it was my midwife, my former midwife, Yeshi Newman, who had studied with Master Mingtong, the first Qigong teacher. And I saw her and she looked great. And I was like, what are you doing? She said, I've gotten into Qigong. So she was the one who brought me, but it was to the first workshop that I attended. And then, but Bob Levine, this acupuncturist, was the one who had planted that seed. And then, you know, when I got to a certain point in my healing, I actually didn't see Bob for many years. And back in 2017, the second health crisis, I went back and saw him for a short period of time, not long. But I've recently reconnected with him. And again, that was more of an intuition. And then when I saw him again this time, it's only been about probably about six or 8 months, something like that. But once a month, I see him. He's semi-retired. And, you know, when I saw him the first time, he said, oh, you know, you're here not because I'm treating you. He said, yeah, I'm going to give you some treatments and stuff. And he said, but we're here to learn together. We're learning something together that we need to do. And so it's been a very different relationship with him. And because of where I am now, right, in terms of my framework of how life works and being much more open and curious about these invisible fields and forces, he has revealed things to me that are quite astounding that I did not know you could get from examining the pulse. And then I realized, oh, he's crafted this over his lifetime of healing work, taking his own intuitions. And he has pulses like ancestral pulses, and he feels past life pulses, like things that I didn't actually know were possible. And again, even with that, kind of throwing it into this area of like extrasensory realms, if you will. Sometimes I don't know what to make of it, but I just kind of keep an open mind. I just observe. And I also recognize that, a lot of this information that's floating around in these invisible fields, like it's coming through him. It's coming through his own unique framework. And then he's interpreting it this way. So I just observe it. And then sometimes I find, surprising or serendipitous correlations. And then other times, I don't know. But it's been a really beautiful relationship where I also feel like I can give back. I feel like I'm also somehow, it's like when you have a mentor and a mentee, that the mentee also, it's not like a one way, it's a two way. And I mean, I know that we've had that in our friendship as well. But I feel that with him, and it feels like a real gift, where, we're just kind of sharing, and dancing and playing, and learning about what healing is.
I mentioned that we drove out together to see our friend Rachel Naomi Remen, who's the medical director of the Commonweal Cancer Health Program, and with whom I've worked for the last 40 years. You also trained with Rachel. What have you learned from your time with and your friendship with, as well as your explorations with Rachel?
It's Rachel, actually, you and Rachel became mentors to me at the same time, but through totally different paths, right? So with you, it was the collaborative on health and the environment. And through Rachel, it was actually, it was a workshop that she was giving, for doctors. I think it was on burnout. I've attended a few of her workshops, weekend workshops. It might have been on burnout. I don't remember what it was about. It doesn't matter. It was about the heart of healing. And then shortly after that, she invited me to be in her living room group, which would meet once a month in her living room. And at the time, I didn't even know you guys were affiliated with each other, maybe much less like very close collaborators and friends. So it was kind of funny to learn that, about that convergence, because it happened at the same time. And I will say, the thing that really opened for me with her as a doctor and a professional, and just in terms of a teaching, was really about how do we bring the heart into medicine, right? Not so much even about healing. It was like, how do we bring it into the medical system, and how do we keep our hearts open, when everything kind of around us is wanting to kind of close it down, and we shut off our emotions, we shut off our grief, we move on and become kind of numb. And so that was a really big opening for me. But the other thing actually that came to me in this visit a couple of weeks ago with the two of you together, because I've been with you guys in group settings, but even there, not so much. It's been very separate. And here I was 2 weeks ago with this incredible opportunity to be with just you two in the living room, right? And it dawned on me actually after I left that you mentioned at the onset that you were an introvert. I mean, I'm an introvert too. I live with a very extroverted life partner, and but I'm introverted. And what I remember very distinctly was that you guys as mentors, so not so much as teachers, but as mentors of like, how do you live life? I was watching you guys, like, how do you do this from a place that is actually deeply interior and quiet, actually quiet. And yet there are these like incredible, right, communities and and just the impact that you had on me and so many others. So I would just watch. How does she do this? How is she being in the doing? Because I would say up until that point, really anybody else that I had sort of as an example, like Paul Farmer, the late Paul Farmer, incredible, right, humanitarian and international aid doctor. I would always say like, oh, he's the doctor that I want to be when I grow up. I mean, I still say that, now. I also had the privilege of him being a mentor and a teacher and a friend. But he's incredibly, incredibly extroverted. So, but usually those were the people, right, that were like the mentors for my life. And I do feel like when I had the real health, when I had the 10-year journey and learning to come into my wholeness, part of that was accepting who I was and then recognizing like, oh, I actually need to be true to who I am instead of trying to be like somebody else and operate like somebody else in the world, in this particular culture, which is very extroverted and very, shall we say, like, sunny. We're like a sun worshiping. And my nature was much more lunar, and much more yin, fluid, dark, and I didn't know how to do that. So to have you two come into my life at that time, of just emerging into the world and how do I be a citizen in the world? How do I be a doctor and a healer in the world? Was a real gift just in terms of your beings.
One of the things that's just been true for us is I'm not going to deflect that you call me a mentor. I will take it in.
That's just true. I love it.
And I understand it's true for you. But also, you have to take in that you have been a mentor for me. And in fact, it's very precious to me when the mentor-mentee relationship moves back and forth, that there's a dance between what we learn from each other. And I always try to do that with people when I have the chance. I mean, even in the Cancer Help Program is a perfect example. The Cancer Help Program exists as what it is because we've been taught by all the people who've come through.
Yes.
So they come to us for a certain teaching, but we receive their teaching, and that in turn forms it. So it's whether or not the universe is a giant thought, the Cancer Help Program is definitely a kind of a. But you mentioned your extraordinary life partner, who I mentioned before, David Hochschild, who I actually knew before I knew you. And I knew his father, Adam Hochschild, when we were both at Harvard. And I haven't gotten to know David's mother, Arlie, who's famous also in her own right. So David is the chair of the California Energy Commission and has been entrusted by two governors with billions of dollars of investment in a solar energy future. And so this isn't the first time we've mentioned this, that you and David together, he's working in the outer world of energy, healing energy for the planet in terms of electrifying the grid. And California being a model for the rest of the country. So David is right at the epicenter of that.
Yeah.
And you are in a much more lunar way at the epicenter of a certain field of inner healing. Now, not only inner, but healing of invisible fields, fields that don't get the same recognition as the extroverted fields. But so you married into this extraordinary family where both Adam Hochschild as a historian and Arlie Hochschild as a sociologist, and their son David as a great energy worker. What's it been like to have a life partner and to marry into this extraordinary family and to bring your own remarkable family, which has settled near you here in Berkeley? So you have these two families surrounded by, I will say, hundreds of close friends. So how do you as an introvert navigate this exuberance of extroversion?
I'll say, we've been married now 20 years, so I've had 20 years of, some trial and error, some, some more graceful periods and some really trying periods. Particularly when my health was very brittle the first time around, it was challenging. Also, we were new parents. We didn't, it was the full living catastrophe, right? Like all of the pressures converging kind of into one, and my health. So many unknowns, but letting go of a lot of attachments to kind of the way that we imagined life to be, as a family, as a young family. It wasn't pretty. It was messy. But we were always, reaching out to the field of people, besides each other. Like if we weren't connecting super well, we had this other field around us that we felt like we could really reach out to and receive support from. So that's pure grace and gratitude for that. It's so now, right now, David and I can say like, we're both about energy. Even before the work with the subtler energy, like the chi energy and the invisible forces. Even functional medicine, if you really go down into the root causes of chronic conditions, the chronic inflammatory conditions, is about energy efficiency. And, like inflammation actually is a very energy intensive process, right? So, but then other places where you need energy and want energy for healing, it's deficient. So it's about energy balance. It's about energy efficiency, energy storage. So we began to realize like, oh my God, we're kind of doing the same thing, and then now I'm like, oh my God, it's not just, individuals and people and internal energy, but and then he's doing this. Now it's like the subtle energies. And like that yoga class example I gave you, it's like, oh my God, we can really transform the form, right? The physical manifestations and the way the physical planet uses energies by cultivating this invisible energy field. That's how I see it. And so that they're really complementary. So it's not so much, I would say, the extroverted kind of, energy that he's in versus mine is quieter and subtler. It's more that actually is like there's a hard infrastructure that people can see. So it's exciting. There's a certain momentum. And I think it's really important, right, to do that. Do I have that kind of energy, to do something like that? I don't. And so I'm grateful for people who do, and similar to like your work in Commonweal, it's like these manifestations of things, of systems, of structures is important. It's important. And how do we actually stay in flow? I think that's the hard part. It's not about whether we build or not. It's can we continually stay in flow, and can we let go of things when they're no longer serving us? So in that sense, I feel like working with the subtle energies is much easier. And so we had a joke when his agency received a lot more funding from a budget surplus, and he said something like, "Oh, maybe we can start a subtle energies division. You can head it up." And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, yeah, we don't need a division. Like we don't need it." And so that was kind of the running joke for a while. But it's easy now to kind of say, oh wow, this is a perfect marriage. It's beautiful and it's very complementary. But it's taken 20 kind of years, and some of it slogging to arrive here. And I will say, our two families were such different backgrounds because, right, mine was evangelical, much more conservative in Texas, Chinese. And my parents were immigrants, so I'm first generation American born. And then David is, Bay Area, San Francisco raised. While we were doing, pro-life rallies, they were marching in the freedom of choice, but also gay pride. I mean, it was completely different cultures coming together, and somehow it worked, and it has worked really beautifully. I think what was challenging for me marrying into this family, and David has one brother who's, very gifted in teaching, working with kids with learning disabilities. So it was like marrying into this family when I wasn't feeling well and struggling just to even do activities of daily living for so long, trying to take care of my kids, trying to, just make do, while they're kind of out there changing the world, was something that I really had to reconcile with, because it's another way of feeling kind of invisible, which is funny, right? Because now I'm kind of extolling the invisible forces, but there's a kind of invisibility of yourself. Like if you can't see yourself, but you also feel like others can't see you, right? It's that thought, it's that intention that somehow enlivens us. And I was feeling overshadowed, even though they were doing nothing. But just by them being who they were and shining and, making big change and all that, it was very hard for me. So it was really about me. I had to do a lot of inner work around that, and it had nothing to do with them. It was about me seeing myself as that. So it's just about, how do I be present? How do I just focus on what's right in front of me? How do I, connect with myself now? And then again, kind of the rest of it, happens then if we're open, right, to life. Life sort of happens. Life shows us the path. And, when we got married, I was very much on this path, kind of like, Paul Farmer. I was like a public health doctor at the county hospital in San Francisco. I also worked at a clinic in the Tenderloin, with refugees and homeless patients, and was doing international aid work in rural China. And I just was like, oh, this is my calling. And so when I got really sick and it took me down this other path, originally, my thought was, I'm just going to get better and then I'm going to go back to being a public health doctor, because that's actually what I want to do. And anytime I went that way, I just kept getting resistance. And that's what I mean about kind of being open and living in flow, and what is life showing us, and paying attention, because, the more resistance I had, the more I would kind of not be balanced in my body. So life kind of just kept pushing me into these other, not pushing, guiding me, flowing me into these other areas of healing that I never would have, never could have imagined. And writing, I mean, I remember being so happy of placing out of AP English because I didn't have to write anymore after high school. And so, all of this is kind of a complete surprise. And I do remember a moment when I'm really involved also with a global distributed all-volunteer organization called Service Space. which you connected me to. And I remember when I was giving my first kind of workshop, it was around Qigong, and there were several hundred people participating in this 2-week challenge. And I was facilitating the first opening session, and, it was freely offered, and the whole thing was a pop-up team, right, or a volunteer team, and it was an incredible experience for me. And I just had that knowing, like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, this is the healthcare or the medicine or the healing that's being freely offered to the community, in a global way that was manifested in a way that was totally different than how I pictured it before of doing global health. And just kind of laughing at it and just saying, I never could have imagined that, because one of my limitations before was public speaking, was attention of any kind was paralyzing for me. So to then suddenly find myself in front of hundreds of people and doing this, I just thought, wow, life is really funny. And can we open ourselves to receive not just appreciation from other people, but to truly receive what life is offering us and the opportunities? And can we go beyond what limits us to step into that?
You've just mentioned service space, and our friend and colleague Nipun Mehta, who is the founder of Service Space, and many people regard him as a modern Gandhi, and the work he does is extraordinary. And at some level, you found a real community there with other beloved friends of ours. Could you say just a little more about what service space is and what it means in your life, what it has offered you?
So service space is, I think it's kind of similar to Commonweal in the sense that it's hard to describe. And it's even harder to describe than Commonweal because there's no physical place, right? It's virtual. It's completely global, virtual, always has been, even though similar to healing circles and Rachel Remen's work, there are communities spread throughout the world that actually meet in person, right? But service space, I would just say, is they describe themselves more as an ecosystem rather than even a community, and certainly not an organization. It's fully distributed. So,
and entirely volunteer.
Entirely volunteer, and finding freedom in the volunteerism because we're completely outside of any market system, right? So if people want to donate money, like Nipun and all of us others, because we understand the service-based way, we'll ask, well, thank you. Could you donate some time or some skills? Because it's really about the interaction being the true nourishment, being the true, I can't remember what they call it, but it's not money, right? It's not about, it's about, being nourished in the heart. So then there are multiple initiatives. The one that I'm currently one of the co-anchors for is the Awaken Calls, which is the podcast series. And we also do workshops. But again, it's the way I describe it is actually I use the term pop-up teams, because, like, for example, the Qigong challenge that we did, we just kind of put it out there and then call for volunteers, and people show up and they volunteer whatever they can. So we're working with a very fluid set of volunteers, which also has its challenges. For the core anchors, it can be challenging because there's so much movement. And at the same time, it's a practice in letting go of attachment. So it's like, we might have a vision of something, and it's helpful to have a structure, which, because Nipun he's a coding wizard, right? His tech is his manifestation, one of his gifts. And so he will code and craft these containers online that help to deepen relationships in a way that is fascinating. That's actually live. It's in real time. He'll be watching how people in a particular challenge, or maybe on a podcast series, on a Q&A, he'll be watching how people use technologies and interface with it, and how can they learn from each other. So it's a collective learning platform and ecosystem. So it's really about many to many, as opposed to like one teacher or several teachers and lots of people. So we're always learning from each other. So it is kind of a co-mentoring platform. And yeah, so it feels very dynamic. And then for me, beautiful friendships, like soul friendships with people that some of them I haven't even met in person. And then, but really this exercise in letting go of attachments. So yeah, so there's a fluidity, and I don't really know what will come next. All I know is that I'm somehow involved. Yeah.
You had a great tragedy in your life in Texas, where you were engaged to an extraordinary man named Kurt, who was a fellow physician in a residency program, and he died. Could you tell us about Kurt and what your love for him and his death meant in your life?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a fortuitous time actually to be talking about him, because
It's his birthday.
His birthday was 2 days ago, yeah, and my birthday is today. And so we used to.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So yeah, he's felt very close, and it's funny. Yeah, I haven't actually, had tears about him for quite some time, but he didn't like attention either, and I didn't like attention, and I had some issues with it, and neither of us liked our birthdays for that reason. And so the funny thing is our birthdays being 2 days apart, we would always celebrate non-birthdays on the day between. So. But he's been very present for me this week. And we were together for 6 years. I will say, he was the first love of my life. And I've been blessed somehow in my life to have multiple loves of my life, including people that I'm not partners with, just having soul friendships with. And so, and we went through a lot. It wasn't just his death, but we faced a lot of life-threatening challenges. His mental health, his physical health. He had an open heart surgery when we were engaged. That was not that any heart surgery is small, but that one was really not small. So there was considerable, risk to the surgery itself, even though he was young and very fit. But there was also a lot of questions about what would happen after the surgery. What would his quality of life be? And so we dealt with a lot in our very young, in our 20s. And then when I was a second-year resident, he died in a car accident. And so it was, but I was also in residency. And, most people, because they don't really know what to do with grief, but particularly like something that kind of sudden and tragic, that, the kind of the general advice or wisdom that I got was, well, just, grieve him, but then go back to work. Like, just normalize your life as much as possible. So I grieved him really hard for a week, and then he had his memorial service, and then I went back to my residency. And, in residency training at that time in particular, like it's a little bit different now. It's still really rigorous now, but people understand like residents are human beings, and it shouldn't be like military boot camp, that kind of thing. Back then, having a week off, I truly felt grateful that everybody was covering for me. So when I went back to work a week later, I felt not just grateful, but oh, this is my duty. I'm gonna finish this off. So I finished residency, and then after that, I had no reason to stay in Texas. So I came out to the Bay Area after that. And it was a lot of processing. First, his death, which left me with a lot of questions because I had all these questions and fears from my evangelical upbringing. And Kurt had been raised Catholic, and we both had those fears. Like, what the hell happens after you die? And like, do we have to decide now? And wait, we can't decide. We can't believe something that we don't believe. So that we both had a lot of fear around that. And then he died. And so suddenly I was left with all these questions about, well, where is he? And is he really, is he suffering, And so that was a lot to kind of be with. And then, and then when I met David, my husband, it was only a couple of years after Kurt died, and it felt so raw. The last thing I was looking for was a relationship. And, but it was just one of those things, like Kurt's parents came to visit San Francisco, David came to meet them, and I don't know, it just fit together. And David was not afraid of my grief. He wasn't afraid of my processing. And he was just, you know him, he's one of the largest hearted people that, that I knew then and that I know now. And so he embraced it all. So I thought, okay, even though this feels like I'll probably be processing this for the rest of my life. So if here's a man who loves me and I love him, we might as well, kind of thing, give it a go. So David and Kurt, I don't know, they were very much woven in together at the beginning. And then, then for a long time, I kind of not forgot, but the grief wasn't with me, right, of Kurt. And I was very much focused on my life and trying to heal. And then I would say, kind of recently, in the last couple of years, he has resurfaced like much more present. But I think it's because I think he's always been there in this invisible field. But I wasn't really able to receive it or to fully understand and to be actually awakened to these invisible forces as this intimate, right, kind of relationship. So he's been a lot more present. And what I've learned actually on my journey, and again, this is just kind of where I am, is that because, right, in the realm of consciousness and energy, things don't die, right? There might be a biological death. That's what we're talking about, like the biological definition of life. But conscious information and energy as just always continuing their vibration and their transformation, he feels very alive to me in that way. And so there's actually been healing in my relationship with him that I didn't really know needed to happen until the last few years. And so much of the focus has been on like his death and like grieving and healing that. And that I didn't even realize like there was some significant trauma on my part of all the other experiences that we experienced together, that I was always worried about him. And I was, oh my God, and then something actually then did happen, right, where he died. But so many of these other crises and challenges during the time that that he and I were both in medical school and residency. So I had not actually dealt with any of that. And I didn't know it was there. But it was Kurt kind of in this subtle manifestation of our relationship that was the teacher for me, and then I realized, oh, wow, actually relationships continue, and we can continue to heal together and individually, even after the person dies. It's harder because it's subtle, right? It's much easier. Well, or I don't know. It depends on how you look at it, right? Sometimes it's harder in the form because there's so much entanglement and attachment and all this stuff. But then, so it's been a powerful relationship for me and very alive.
He comes to you in dreams sometimes.
He's come to me in dreams, and again, I don't know if he's coming or my consciousness is somehow right manifesting him in a way that I can relate to. I personally don't see spirits and things like that, but I it's more of a direct knowing. It's like I know, like I know he's present in certain times and spaces. And so, yeah, it feels very alive.
One of the journeys that you and I took together fairly early in this 12-year period where we've been walking into this field, whatever we call it, was I had become interested in Enneagram, which is a character study structure of 9 different points around a circle. And so that was one of the fairly rare experiences where I had the lead in exploration.
That's not true. That is
No,
not
that's
true.
not true. But in any case, you had some resistance to it because you didn't like to pigeonhole people. But it became a structure that we both used and continue to use at some level just as a way of understanding ourselves and other people. With the benefit of hindsight, I know it's not high on your list of favorite hits, but how do you hold Enneagram now?
I love Enneagram. I love Enneagram. I think it's incredible. Mm-hmm. I don't have issues with the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. I am very aware, as with any system, mm-hmm. Qigong included, right? Mm-hmm. Like one of the foundational teachings is do not get attached to the method mm-hmm. or the teachings. Mm-hmm. It's not the same as what they're pointing to, as what they're cultivating, this mm-hmm. inner state, right? Mm-hmm. The state of being. And so it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. And with Enneagram, which I dove into quite deeply, mm-hmm. with you, right? Mm-hmm. And then you just took it like to this whole other level. But the reason I stopped was because I could feel my own resistances because I was getting attached to, what? Could I sense into like what, someone's patterns were? I could. But and my own patterns, yes, I could. But if I started saying like, because the language of the Enneagram is often like, oh, I'm a 1 wing 2, or oh, I'm a, 6 subtype, whatever. And there was an identification with it, which is when it becomes an attachment. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a limitation. Mm-hmm. And so then I started saying like, oh God, like, okay, it's one thing to help me understand myself and other people and how to be, but it's about understanding myself so I can overcome what mm-hmm. what limits me, as opposed to something that kind of protects me and mm-hmm. keeps me right in my place. So that was when I began to kind of, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, like I'm starting to get attached to the framework, and I'm starting to just see people as like numbers and like, and personalities. And that's not the point. Mm-hmm. And then, going deeper was that I realized like, oh, well, the original, or at least more of the ancient, what we understand about Enneagram in the more ancient origins, is it wasn't just a kind of a mental framework and a personality. And even if you go into the spiritual framework, there was also embodiment in dance, and there was also music. So it was a much more mind, body, spirit, coherence, mm-hmm. full body, mind, heart experience, as opposed to just the mental frameworks, even if it was a spiritual framework, which is actually what happened in the West. And so it made me appreciate it more. And so, there were sayings about, I don't remember, you would know, but someone who said, oh, if you go into the desert, I could totally be distorting this.
Gurdjieff.
Did Gurdjieff say that if you go into the desert, all you need is the Enneagram?
That if you were in the desert and you drew the circle of the Enneagram with its internal arrows uh-huh. around the 9 points in the sand, that you could know all there was to know from that symbol.
Yes. And so to me, that's really powerful. But understanding also that the framework that he was referencing also involved the embodiment and the heart piece, right? So I think, I could say the same thing about Qigong. But again, what we tend to do as just in terms of our analytical minds and our human smaller minds is to just get attached to that framework.
Yeah,
right. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, that's kind of when I could see that. And when I see, and you know this because we've been friends for so long, but in a lot of the other arenas or areas that I've seen, like I see it with functional medicine, right? It's like, oh, we can get totally attached to the framework. And how do we step back and look at the bigger picture too and begin to dance with the information that we have? So I do that with any framework. And so it's not downputting Enneagram. I still use it and I love it, because it helps, particularly when I have challenges, in a relationship. I can use it to feel into my own patterns, like what pattern needs to kind of unravel. Help me understand the other person. Like, what is that other person like kind of doing? And then it just allows me to have more distance. Like, I can just observe that person's patterns instead of me labeling the person with a number.
So, as you know, I'm an Enneagram 5, which is the observer, and you describe yourself as an Enneagram 1, which is described as the perfectionist in the literature. How do you hold, and of course we're all points on the Enneagram, and I agree with you, there are many very superficial aspects of it. For me personally, having studied depth psychologies for 60 years, I've found Enneagram to be the most, how can I say this, that it yields the most useful information about myself and others of all the systems that I've looked at, all of which Freud, Jung, Assagioli, all the others, but the lineage that goes from Oscar Ichazo, who developed the Enneagram of Personality, to Claudio Naranjo, who taught it in Berkeley, and then current schools all evolved from that, basically. And particularly Beatrice Chestnut's book, The Complete Enneagram, has turned out to be particularly useful to me. But the question I'm really coming to is, in your own understanding of yourself, what, if anything, does identifying yourself as coming from an Enneagram 1 place tell you about yourself?
Well, firstly, what was interesting to me was that I don't even like to say that I'm a 1, right. That I have one strong 1 pattern.
Yeah.
I've only taken 2 Enneagram tests, and I tested both as 5, right? And I know that there's a 1 subtype that looks kind of like a 5. Mm-hmm. But I knew, and even in our relationship, I was just like, oh, it's very clear. Like, no, I'm not a 5, or I don't have the strong, 5 is not the foundational pattern for me.
Though curiously, 5 is the Buddha point, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I think I have a lot of 5-like tendencies, and in terms of observation and, more introspection, more introversion, and sometimes actually detaching as well. But it's more about the underlying patterns or the motivations, right, and the fears, the fixations as well, where I was like, oh, actually, I'm much more in a 1 pattern, because it's not about amassing knowledge for me. It's about understanding the truth with a certain degree of purity. And the reason why I was surprised, I gravitated towards 1 was because I never thought of myself as a perfectionist. In fact, I was, kind of I felt like I was sort of the anti-perfectionist when I was a kid. I couldn't really do anything right. And so even that name, the archetype of the perfectionist for ones doesn't feel true to my experience. It's more like about purist. But I see more patterns now.
Well, let me just say there,
yeah.
as you know, there are 3 subtypes, right?
Yeah.
Self-preservation, one-to-one, and social. So only the self-preservation one tries to be perfect. And the one-to-one one tries to do it with individual people. But the social one is the one-to-one one actually does it with causes, but the social one is a teacher, and it seeks to. They don't necessarily seek to teach, but they seek to embody ways of being that others may learn from.
Interesting.
And
Right.
so, if I can go on for a moment on a little riff about how I have come to see you, this image that I described about whether you say swimming upward or being propelled upward with resistance to it being pushed upward, however you describe it, there is this upward movement. So and we haven't covered all of this, but I'll ask you to comment on it. When you were a child in a heavily evangelical Christian family in Texas, where you were in a small minority of Asian children, very large white schools, where you were teased, or tormented, or whatever the right word is. Family dynamics where it wasn't always easy for you. There was a lot of time where you were self-doubting. You've even described times at which you hated yourself, that you really didn't like yourself. So you came from this place of being in a minority, but in an evangelical family that your parents had founded this church, and you were some ways seen as the perfect family in the church community. You go up through high school. You're not necessarily expected to go to college, but you apply to college and you get in. You finish college very well. Nobody expects you to go to medical school. You go to medical school, you excel. Nobody expects you to become an internal medicine doc, but you do a residency, you excel. Not only do you excel, but you're offered the position of chief resident. You turn it down, right? And so in each area that I've seen you in the time I've known you, of integrative medicine, functional medicine, intuitive medicine, though you didn't pursue that in depth the way you pursued the others. But let's just take integrative medicine and functional medicine. And then with 2 Qigong teachers, in each new field that you enter, whether you are swimming upward or propelled upward, within a remarkably short period of time, you have mastered that area to the point where the teacher asks you to take a primary role in disseminating it. When I met you, you had, or when you started your book, your memoir, Brave New Medicine, you didn't know a lot about writing. But you took a course with your father-in-law, Adam Hochschild, at Berkeley.
Yeah.
You were worried about whether you were going to fail the course. You turned out to be one of the best students in the course. You then wrote this extraordinary memoir and got very good at writing. So what I'm pointing to and asking you to receive this without deflecting it is a life tendency to either swim upward or be propelled upward toward excellence in a whole series of fields, and then to be regarded by your peers in these fields as a mentor, as a teacher, and yet maintaining this tremendous personal humility and some level sense of humor about the whole enchilada. So I invite you to comment on that, whether you think I've gotten some of it wrong, but as a friend observing you, what do you make of this?
I do think, I do take it with a sense of humor, It is funny. I do see it. Well, first of all, thank you for that reflection. And, and I do try, or I'll say I do practice observing that and receiving it. But also, again, and I think this is where also the field, and I know this is part of the Qigong teaching, is that when we are really attuned to the field and being collective as one, that we do each have our unique individual lessons that we need to learn, but also our unique gifts. And at the same time, we're all the same, on this other level. So I receive all of those together, because I don't feel like I got anywhere by myself, and and I'm very cognizant of certainly the visible people, the people, and mentors like you and Rachel, and, and my partner, our family, our communities, really just being part of that, So I'm very aware of that, and slowly recognizing, okay, but each of us also has our own journey and our own sort of calling. Like, what are we going to? And again, I don't want to extol kind of the invisible forces and like nothing else matters. No, actually, it's about manifesting and expressing. So each of us, what are we called to manifest and express? And so in that sense, I do find it kind of funny, and like also recognize, okay, you know what? I did learn to write, and I know some people work on the memoirs for their entire lives, and okay, and I kind of wrote that and did that. But I also, again, I feel a little bit guided, actually a lot guided, And with Teacher Wei, with the book that I edited on Qigong, that one, it was almost like a blur. Actually, I look at the book and I don't even quite remember the process. And I feel like it was because I was just propelled and I was just kind of the instrument. And so it's, again, it's not so much like hiding or discounting or putting myself down. It's more that I really I don't even know, sometimes how things manifest. But something's happening through me, and then I'm grateful to be a vehicle.
Of service.
Yeah.
I'll count that as either a very skillful deflection or...
It wasn't, I didn't mean that's a deflection. And I think I shared this with you once in writing because you brought up the Enneagram, was that what I really enjoy doing is taking frameworks just to different scales, right? So it is. So even in the work of like healing, and I can talk about the invisible fields too, is seeing how different personas or archetypes, enneatypes respond and manifest in the field, right? So it is. So it's more like, I see myself as like, oh yeah, with spaces, with people, with groups, and when I do my healing work with using the field, I'm much more focused on organizing and bringing order to things, right? Which is very much a one characteristic. And so I recognize that not as a limitation or a fixation, but oh, that's my gift. I know how to bring order. I can rearrange furniture in a room that makes it just look neater, even if it's the same amount of stuff in a room, right? And people have told me that time and time again. Oh, I can do that with energy. And so, and then I watch, like, one of my fellow collaborators in Teacher Way's community, one of my primary collaborators, is very clearly, very strongly 7, you know? And I just see, like, she brings a certain enthusiasm and a certain activation to the field. And, like, that's her gift. And, you know, and so, like, taking the Enneagram to that level is also really cool to me. And it's more expansive and it's more fluid. And then because it's talking about these subtler fields, it's harder to get attached to.
What have we not spoken of that you might want to add or mention as we move toward a close?
I don't know. We've covered quite a bit.
I just want to express gratitude. We've talked about doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I talk about these spiritual biographies or whatever we want to call it, as, you know, everybody wants to do these, you know, tweets or these 3-minute heavily edited things, just like the slow food movement. I like to talk about the slow conversation, the conversation that actually has enough space to try to understand what is essential about another human being. And in our case, to try to do that along with sharing the journey of a friendship that's just been tremendously precious to both of us, you know. And so, you know, I'm 80, and it's in the nature of these things that one never knows how long one is going to continue to manifest on the physical plane. And so I wanted to have this conversation together just as a marker for us, if whatever else other people find in it. So I'm just very grateful that you were willing to sit down and have this conversation with me.
No, I'm so grateful. And I guess, you know, I mean, it's funny, you kind of are closing with our friendship. Is, I think, the one question I wanted to ask you in closing is, you know, just like we were talking about, you know, letting go of attachments and just, you know, different evolution, different stages of how we have evolved individually, but also our friendship has been forced to evolve, right? Because as one person changes, the other one, if you don't change, it's fine too, but something about the friendship changes. And, but it is this wave, right? It's this continuous wave. And I'm curious, like, if you have any thoughts on what the next chapter of our friendship, you know, mentorship, co-mentorship, whatever you want to call it, but what's in store?
Well, you used the term about yourself when you were talking about Enneagram 1, not of perfection, but purity, right? And I think, you know, I really do hold with the view that actually the teachings in different traditions are different, but some of the traditions hold friendship as a particularly valuable form of human connection. Because when one is in a marriage or a partnership of that kind, or a work relationship, there are all the forms of entanglement that go with living with another human being, or, you know, working with somebody. But friendship, in the ideal sense, I think, is something where you simply wish the best for the other human being, you know, and you walk with them and accompany them, and that walking together into the key field or the Christ field or the Krishna, Buddha. I call myself a Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, yogic, Sufi with Taoist influences, so however you describe the field, it doesn't matter. Whether you describe it in purely scientific terms, it doesn't matter. But as you said, scientifically, we are clearly immersed in the field. That's just how it is. And so the companions that you find to walk with you through these field immersions with as little baggage and entanglement as possible, I think that over time with friendship, there can be a purification. That some of the various, because friends can be entangled too, and so
Absolutely.
some of those earlier forms of entanglement gradually drop away. And then the question remains that when one person transitions, as Kurt did, to the other side or into the mystery or whatever it is, does the friendship continue? Or if there have been previous lives or future lives, where have there been manifestations together or not? But I think that there's a version of this about love, which, as you point out, means different things in different contexts. But there's the thing about whatever, I can never remember it actually, but being loved gives you strength and loving gives you courage. Or maybe it's the opposite. I can't remember which way it goes. But I think deep friendship can give one both strength and courage. That's what I think. And the ability to be able to share what is precious to us with someone without judgment and with a sense that confidence will be held and trust is profound about a shared journey. That's a very precious thing to me. So, and I've been blessed with, as you have been blessed, with quite a few friends and, my 40-year marriage to my beloved Charles, and I've been blessed with both friendships and deep love experiences. This friendship has been important to me. And it has been part of my own growth in a very deep way. Anything you'd like to add?
No, just gratitude.
Cynthia Li, physician, author, healer, friend, thank you for being with us at the New School.
Thank you so much.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.
The river is a healer. The river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels no way.